We've got a charged atmosphere for two rivals in the East Division. It's the Moonshine Throwdown, Marshall and Western Kentucky.
It's intercepted by Key, and Key has one man to beat. A nice cut move. Edwards can't get him. Key takes it all the way. A pick six for Devin Key.
There goes Key. Splits the defenders and he's gone. 65 yards, he completes it with a somersault.
So please join me in welcoming the 21st head coach in WKU football history, Tyson Helton.
And Marshall's going to finish the year 9-4 and champions of the 2018 Gasparilla Bowl, the 6th consecutive bowl win for the Marshall Thundering Herd.
It is episode 7 of the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. The series of position group breakdowns continues this week. We're talking running backs. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty of things that most casual fans probably want to hear about. Running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. It's running backs. We're going to start in Huntington. We're going to talk about Marshall's running backs, the stable of backs that they have. Trace is here with me to talk Herd backs. Steven's over there in the wings, going to talk some topper running backs here in a little bit. So let's talk about those Marshall running backs, Trace. I mean, this is probably the first time that we've come across a Phil Steele ranking that I do not agree with in regards to the Herd. He has Marshall's running backs rated 6th in the Conference USA. 6th, I said. You got me on that one. The top 2 rushers returned. Yes, they did lose a couple of guys, but the number 1 and number 2 rushers returned, neither one of which played a complete full season, and both had over 550 yards rushing. So, how that adds up to 6th, I don't know. So, talk to me about this stable of running backs, and we'll get into, the 2 projected starters, which everybody knows about here in a second. But overall, as a unit, what about Steele's ranking?
I think it's completely whack, to be honest. I just don't agree with it. That's the only – looking at the Phil Steele rankings for Marshall for the position groups and stuff, that's the only one that I don't agree with, really. I mean, I just don't see 6. I mean, I think the only reason that he says 6 is because the depth's in question a little bit, because Anthony Anderson's gone and Keon Davis is gone. The guys behind – Brendan Knox and Tyler King are unproven. But other than that, I mean, I don't see how you could say 6. I mean, that duo alone, I remember we were talking about it when we were eating lunch a while back. We said that duo is as good as any running back duo in Conference USA.
Yeah.
And I'm sticking by that. I mean, that duo is big time right there. And keep in mind, Tyler King missed the entire second half of the season, and Brendan Knox didn't even have a snap at running back until mid-November. So they did their damage in really short amount of time. So if they can have a full season healthy, 12, 13, hopefully 14 games played, they're going to really do some damage. I can't wait to see what they do, especially with a seasoned offensive line, coming back that we're excited about. Herd fans are all excited about. And we've talked about on this podcast and stuff. And I made the prediction on the last episode about the offensive line that they're going to open up running lanes to create the most rushing yards per game in a season since 2014. I still think that will happen. And then obviously Brendan Knox and Tyler King are going to be the catalyst for that. So I think this unit's going to be really good. There's one guy in particular behind King and Knox that I'm excited to see hopefully get some playing time, which I'll hit on him later. But, yeah, I mean, to me, I don't see how you can put this unit anywhere except in the top 3 in the conference, honestly. So that's where I am with the running backs.
So maybe there's a caveat to that number 6 ranking. As I'm looking a little closer, they've got a bona fide. Phil's got a bona fide number 1 with UAB. A couple of schools tied at 2. There is no 3. A couple of schools tied at 4, and there is no 5. So you take that into account. I mean, say what you will, but 6th is still way out of line in my opinion. So let's talk about those 2 leading rushers that are returning. Projected starters, of course, Tyler King and Brendan Knox. It's really hard to say who's 1 and 2 or if it's 1A and 1B because, hey, Tyler King is a known entity at this point. Brendan Knox in essentially, if you add the quarters up, it's like 4 total games, but it's, 4 and a piece of another game or something like that. But Tyler King, 6 foot, 190-pound junior, 108 carries last year, 655 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground. That's 6.1 yards per carry in 7 games. Phil still ranks him as his number 65 draft-eligible running back this year, and he lands on Phil Steele's preseason Conference USA, or not preseason, but Conference USA 4th team. Moving along to Brendan Knox, the 6 foot, 223-pound sophomore, 95 carries, 578 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground. That's also good for 6.1 yards per carry. And like I said, just about 4 games. He didn't see action until the 4th quarter of game number 8 of the season for the Herd. And then after that, all he did was rip off 116 yards versus Charlotte, 109 yards versus FIU, 204 yards against Virginia Tech, and then 93 yards in the first half of the Gasparilla Bowl before he went down with injury. On top of all that, Phil still ranks him as his number 60 draft-eligible running back this year. Brendan Knox also lands on Phil Steele's All-Conference USA 2nd team. So talk about those 2 guys, Trace. Tyler King and Brendan Knox got to be one of the top, if not the top, we'll see, 1-2 punch at running back in the conference.
I agree 100%. I'm absolutely just stoked to see what this duo can do this year. And, I was thinking about it before we did the show and everything, and I was thinking, honestly, in recent memory, I think that running back duo right there matches up with any Marshall's had in recent memory. I mean, even in the late 90s, Low Turner and Doug Chapman, Devin Johnson and whoever you want to do in with him.
whoever.
Earl Charles and Butchie Wallace, whoever you want to say. I think that's as good as a duo overall as Marshall's had in a long time. And I really, really believe that. I think they're super talented guys. Tyler King's explosiveness, his speed is just crazy. That ODU game last year was probably his best game in a Marshall uniform, if you think about it. I mean, he just absolutely went wild. And then Brendan Knox, didn't even make a start until mid-November against Charlotte. And then after that, he was a man on a mission. And he didn't play really any meaningful snaps until mid-November. And then, like you mentioned, he missed the second half of the Gasparilla Bowl. So if he would have played most of the year, he would have easily been 1,000 yards last year. He averaged about 115 yards a game or something along those lines. The guy's just really good. And like I said, I think the offensive line being back and, in good shape is going to really help both of those guys. But I think the world of these 2 really, I think they're going to have a huge year, health permitting, of course, it all relies on that. But I expect big things.
Yeah. And I hate to breeze right past Tyler King. We can't really do that because he's done it for 2 years now. And the big question is, can he stay healthy all year long? If he can, either one of these guys can be 1,000-yard back. The question is, will there be enough carries to go around for one of those guys to get to 1,000 yards? Because you'd like to think you got that type of athletes, you spread the carries around so that no one guy gets too much abuse put on him. So hopefully they can both last throughout the season. But about Tyler King and just about how he was just about to hit that groove, I jotted down notes here. He had a slow start to 2018. Now, he had 170 total yards on just 38 carries through 4 games. And that's not burning the world down, but he went on a tear after that. 165 yards against Middle Tennessee, 195 yards against Old Dominion, 125 yards against Florida Atlantic. That's 485 odd yards on 70 carries, which bumped that average up to 6.9 carries. It was 6.1 for the year, 6.9 yards per carry over those final 3 games before he got injured. So he was just hitting that stride. But of course, the flip side of that coin is if Tyler King is hitting that stride and doesn't get injured, maybe you don't see Brendan Knox and him get an opportunity to break out. So, it's just one of those things. Now you have 2 really, really, really good backs in the backfield. But I posed the question to you on Twitter, so I'm going to ask you now before we talk about the guys in the rotation. It was a fairly simple question. Can Tyler King and Brendan Knox combine for 1,600 plus yards for the Herd in 2019? I guess I should have said, should they? Because, yes, of course they can. So will they? Will the opportunity be there, do you think?
Yeah, I think the opportunity will be there, and I think that they should and probably will. It all depends on their health, of course, because both guys had a little time last year where they were hurt. But, just a couple years ago, Tyler King and Keon Davis combined for over 1,600 yards. And that was, so, I think that this duo can definitely do that. I remember last year, one of my hot takes for the running backs last year was they were going to combine for 2,000 yards, have 2,000 yards rushers. Now I'm not going to predict that this year, but like you said, if they're in there and they get enough carries and they're healthy and everything, I think they definitely can have the talent to do that. It's just when you have two number one running backs, basically, it's hard to spread carries around. But yeah, 1,600 yards, I for sure think that can happen, and probably will happen if they're healthy.
Well, you say that as if it's not going to be that huge of a deal, and you may be right. So obviously the next question is, well, if 1,600 is not a huge deal, can they top 2,000 yards for the season?
Well,
see,
yeah.
now you start to think, well, I don't know. So
it's just hard to. How many teams actually do that? Like, how many teams can actually do that besides like Army or running teams, Georgia Tech or somebody?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Well, it's not supposed to be something easily attained. And when I ask you about 1,600 yards, you think, well, yeah, they'll definitely do that for sure if they stay healthy. Okay. So if they stay healthy and 1,600 yards isn't going to be a big deal, that's basically a definite in your opinion. Well, it's just 400 more yards between them. Can it happen? Especially if you talk about the Herd. Let's say they make a Conference USA championship game and they get that extra game, on top of a, bowl game and all that kind of stuff. So if you get that 13th game or whatever, 14th game, however many it is, if you make a conference title game, then is it in the conversation? Do they have to maybe make a title game in order to get to that 2,000 plateau?
I think so. Yeah.
You probably definitely need an extra game. So let's talk about some of these guys in the rotation. It's a youth movement, basically. You've got King, you've got Knox, and then it's nobody really with any meaningful carries for the Herd that I can think of on the roster. Couple of big losses, which were all the other meaningful carries. But I jotted down a few names. You can talk to me about these guys and anybody else you want to mention. Sheldon Evans, the 5'11", 196-pound sophomore. Joseph Early, the 5'9", 187-pound junior. And then a couple of guys who are fresh in the 2019 class. So we'll see if they redshirt, if they get on the field. We'll just see. Knowledge McDaniel, the 5'11", 215-pound freshman. And Jeremy Smith, the 5'11", 185-pound freshman. So, Trace, what about that rotation? Anybody leap out at you?
Yeah, the two new recruits, like you mentioned, I don't know if they're going to play at all. They might just redshirt them for all I know. But, there's one guy that you mentioned there in particular that I actually touched on in one of the previous episodes we did, talking about this Marshall spring game, and that was Sheldon Evans. And I really think he could have a solid backup, backup, more like third string role. I feel like he could have a solid one of that. Anthony Anderson had a really good career at Marshall as a third option, basically. And I feel like Evans could be something like that. He really impressed me in that spring game for Marshall. He was the one that stood out the most to me offensively for sure. Now, granted that they weren't playing a lot of starters and a lot of guys probably weren't playing that are going to play, but Evans really looked good in that spring game, in my opinion. So I think he's going to be a good third option. Marshall's always so deep at running back. I feel like for the last decade they've been deep at running back. I feel like they always have 3 or 4 guys to turn to. This year, it's a little more questionable because the guys behind the top duo we keep talking about, the guys are unproven. But, if there's one thing you can't count out Marshall having a good, stable running back. So I think Evans is going to be a solid third option.
Well, we would be remiss if we did not talk about the 2 main losses from this unit from the year before, and that's, of course, Keon Davis and Anthony Anderson. Keon Davis, MVP of the Gasparilla Bowl, very versatile back, played a lot of special teams, kick return. I don't know if he did punt returns, but kick return for sure. Anthony Anderson was that short yardage bruising back who would get the 1 or 2 yard touchdown when you needed to bang one into the end zone on a 3rd and goal or something like that. So different type of backs, but both very useful in that offense. It stands to see if anybody can fill those type of holes. I mean, I don't see anybody of the guys I mentioned that has the build of an Anthony Anderson. There's no 240-pound back. Keon Davis, his versatility alone was a huge weapon. So we'll see if anybody that might be in this rotation that we haven't seen can play that kind of game like Keon brought for the Herd for several years. So as we get into the season goes along and guys are going to need a rest, people might get dinged up. We'll see if that happens. So let's talk about these questions, Trace. Of the guys I just mentioned, who's the hardest to replace?
I think it's Keon Davis. He was a 4-year, really productive 4-year player for the Herd. I mean, from his freshman year, 2015, all the way until last year, he made plays every single year. I mean, there's not many guys that can say that. That's a 4-year. I mean, he wasn't always a starter, but basically a 4-year starting caliber player. Really versatile guy, could catch the ball out of the backfield, could really do kick returns amazingly. Just ask Miami of Ohio. He was a really good player for the Herd. So I think he's definitely the toughest guy to replace. But I mean, Anthony Anderson is also a tough guy to replace too in that short yardage kind of situation because they don't have a big back right now. So that's going to be tough to replace, just, the depth alone. But then they really don't have anybody that's a bruising kind of running back. But I would say Keon Davis just because he was a 4-year legit player that was one of the more versatile and overall rounded, better players Marshall's had at running back in a while, I would say. So I would say Keon Davis. Yeah,
that's a good choice for sure. One last note on Keon Davis. For those of you that just love random trivia, one of those things that might win you the $5,000 radio trivia contest, Keon Davis is the answer to one of those. And he would be the answer to the trivia question, what was the first ever play on the Facebook era of college football? And it was a Keon Davis kick return for touchdown. That was the very first play on Facebook college football ever, was Keon Davis kicking a 99-yard kick return for touchdown against Miami, Ohio. All right, so who are you most excited to see this year, Trace?
That's a really tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one. Yeah,
that's a really tough one. I was thinking about it. I mean, it was almost like a coin flip, but I think I'm more excited to see Brendan Knox, honestly, because, I know what I'm going to get with Tyler King because he's been here for 2 years and he's been a really good player. But Brendan Knox had a small sample size last year, really stood out like he was a legit first team caliber, running back. So I'm really excited to see him in his first full season at running back. He's going to get a lot of carries, going to get first team reps the whole year, not just the end of the year. I mean, King's a known entity. I'm really excited to see Knox now as he has a chance to really break out. So I'm going to go Brendan Knox.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I mean, you can't take anything away from Tyler King. I mean, the dude has been one of the highlight plays of our intro for the past 2 seasons. So, yep. He's got game-breaking ability, but that's just it. We know he has game-breaking ability. Now I want to see what Brendan Knox can do for a whole season if he can stay healthy. I hate that we have to keep saying if they can stay healthy.
Yeah.
How about a breakout player for 2019?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Sheldon Evans for that, because King and Knox, I mean, I don't really consider that would be a breakout because you already know what those guys bring for the most part. But if Sheldon Evans can go out there and have roughly maybe a 300, 400 yard season or something like that, I think that'd be a really good addition to that running back unit. I think that would be really good for the unit because the top 2 guys, you can't always lean on those guys because if somebody gets hurt, you're going to need somebody to come in and provide some depth. And that's where Sheldon Evans comes in. I expect him to have a good year if he gets enough chances, which, I mean, ultimately he probably will through one reason or another. So I think Evans is going to have a good year. I think he could have an unsung hero kind of year to really add a lot to that running back unit. Just kind of extra stuff, and when he's needed, if there's an injury pops up or anything. So I'm going to go Sheldon Evans.
The one thing we haven't talked about, and I'm not saying this directly relates to Sheldon Evans or any other back, is we haven't seen very many passes to the running back in recent years, right. In this Marshall offense. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that finds its place in this offense now in year 2 of Tim Cramsey. So we'll see maybe the best pass catching running back sees more playing time than they otherwise normally would. Maybe just something to keep an eye on. How about your potential MVP for this unit in 2019?
Well, the quote-unquote coin flip earlier went to Brendan Knox, so this time it's going to go to Tyler King.
Yeah.
That's the score I am with it. Like, either one of those players could be for either one of those answers. But I'll say King just because I think, knock on wood, he'll have his healthiest year. He'll probably play his most amount of games, have his most amount of carries. So I could see him really just leading the charge out there big time. Even though Knox is going to be right nipping at his heels, so to speak, I could see, King. I could see King ended up being – I'm not going to say this for sure, but I can see King being easily one of the top few rushers in the Conference USA this year. I mean, I'm not going to predict it as a hot take, so I have another hot take in mind, but no, I mean, King probably the MVP, but it could easily be Knox too. It's just a coin flip between those guys.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay. You alluded to it. So now the listeners are ready for the weekly hot take. So what are the hot take/takes? I don't know if there's two. Well, maybe just one, but what's the hot take this week for the Herd running backs?
The hot take this week for the Herd running backs, I don't know if everyone will say this is a necessarily really hot take, but I consider it a hot take. I think both of those guys, Knox and King, will both be at least second team All-Conference USA running backs at the end of the year. Now, I don't know how many running backs they choose for that, but I feel like both of them will at least be second team. Honestly, they could. I wouldn't say they'll both be first team. That's kind of hard to expect, obviously. But I feel like one of them will be first team, one will be second team. But I think that at worst, they will both be at least second team if everything plays out like we expect it with the health, like we keep talking about over and over, all that good stuff. So if it works out, I think they will both be at least second team All Conference USA running backs at the end of the year.
Wow. I think they only choose. They might just. I would say they don't choose more than two for the first team or second team.
Yeah.
Wow. Both at least second team all conference. Woo.
Yep.
That's pretty stout, seeing as though there is a lot of running back talent in the league. There honestly is.
Yeah.
And especially given that the Herd is ranked 6th as a unit, that means that Phil still thinks there's a lot of guys that are better than these two guys in the conference. So, we'll see, especially since, Brendan Knox makes the second team. Tyler King doesn't even land until the fourth team. So, neither one of them are all conference first teamers in Phil Steele's opinion, but hey, it is what it is. I like the hot take. Hang with us on the other side of this break. We're talking topper running backs. Going to be interesting. I'm glad Moff's back with us this week. So stick around. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast.
Green faking the reverse, going over the top to Tyree Brady. Touchdown, Marshall. Dropping it in the bucket for 6.
Green throws such a nice deep ball.
It's time to talk Western Kentucky University Hilltopper running backs. And Stephen Moffitt is back with us this week. The schedules were able to be lined out, so the triumphant return of Mostradamus is upon us, and he's ready to kick you some knowledge regarding these running backs. Steve Phil Steele is not kind to the top of running backs, ranks them 10th in the Conference USA. A little harsh in my opinion, just like the Herd, but I think is the theme with this team. The rankings are so low because of the unknowns that are out there and the big changes that are out there. So, we'll see how it goes. Talk to me a little bit about this unit, and then we'll talk some projected starters.
Yeah, I'm just, a lot of this unit's success is really going to kind of piggyback on what I believe the O-line is going to do, and I think that's going to be a strength. So that projection be damned. I think we're going to, surprise some people. I think the Hilton offense is going to be a lot more dynamic and playmaking than what Sanford was, and kind of the unpredictability at play calling we saw there. Playbook's going to be opened up a little bit. Some snaps going to be taken down the field. Some better gaps are going to be created on the line with those big boys all coming back up front. So, I think that number 9 rating is going to be a little off by year's end.
Well, I can't help but agree. I mean, you get your number 1 runner back from this past season. You get one of your top runners back from 2 seasons ago, and some very capable backs coming in on that rotation. So let's talk about those 2 projected starters right off the bat. I was kind of surprised that Phil still did not go with Joshua Samuel as RB1, as how he is the number 1 returning rusher. But Phil still went with newly Hilltopper again, Quentin Baker. But hey, you've said it many times yourself, very athletic kid, huge playmaking ability. The 5'9", 185-pound junior spent 2018 at Portland State, but in 2017, 65 carries, 233 yards, and a touchdown in a Topper uniform. So, he's got some stats on the stat sheet. He is a very athletic kid, and if he can put it all together in 2019, I mean, hey, maybe he's older and wiser and ready to break out in a big way. I mentioned Joshua Samuel, the number 1 rusher from last season, the 5'11", 205-pound sophomore, 121 carries last season, 639 yards, a touchdown, good for 5.3 yards per carry. Steve, what about those 2 guys, man?
Yeah, I mean, the Quentin Baker saga has been well documented on this podcast and on Twitter, and from flipping his recruitment to legal troubles to injury to leaving school, coming back. The season 2 years ago when he had the 200 some odd rushing yards, he actually didn't play full season. He got injured. He broke his collarbone versus Vanderbilt, if you recall. Yep. His freshman year, I think he was an all-CUSA running back. I think he had close to 600, 500 plus yards and 4 touchdowns as a freshman. So the talent's there. Hopefully the playbook is there for him, because I think the opportunities are going to be there. And then Joshua Samuel coming back again, all CUSA freshman back last year, just proved to be an iron horse last year, one of the few bright spots on offense. So, that's kind of going to be a 1A, 1B in my opinion. Quentin Baker may take the first handoff, but I see that their workload is probably going to be pretty close to even, or maybe even the hot hand for the game. Whoever's gashing the defense the most that game is going to, get the lion's share of the carries. But at the same time, when 1B comes in, I don't feel like we're going to drop off much. I mean, those guys are going to be dynamic, and I'm excited to see them both. I mean, they're going to be a strong tandem this year.
Yeah, this all plays into what we talked about last week, and that's offensive line. And we all 3 of us think that the offensive line from Western Kentucky is going to make a huge difference in the run game and in pass protection. So there's no reason to think that these numbers for these guys aren't going to increase over what they were able to do the year before. I mean, as the offensive line turned its corner, as did the running game towards the end of the season. You saw it evidenced by the first 100-yard rusher and, all that stuff that we've talked about before happened late in the season when the offensive line started to gel better. And I have no reason to think that Joshua Samuels can't be a 800, 900, maybe even 1,000-yard back if given enough carries. There's no reason to think that Quentin Baker can't be that same back. I mean, I posed the question on Twitter. I'll ask you now, and you can answer it. Just basically what I just said. Can Joshua Samuel or Quentin Baker top the 1,000-yard mark for Western Kentucky in 2019? And just like what I said with Trace, I should have said will rather than can, because of course they both can. The question is, will the opportunities be there enough for one or both of those guys to get 1,000 yards this season?
Yeah, I think, if one of those guys gets enough carries, kind of like my offensive line hot take was, I think we can have a running back average 100 yards a game this season. So assuming that their health allows them to play more than 10 games, you cross 1,000 yards. So, I can't contradict myself. I think we're going to have a surprisingly strong rushing season, given the preseason rankings by Mr. Steele for the offensive line and the running back group. So, I think one of those guys, or both of those guys even, are going to have strong seasons. And I'm not going to be surprised to see one of them hit 1,000 yards. Absolutely.
Yeah, given enough carries, Josh Samuel could have done it last year. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry. So you do the math, 5.3 times 200 carries, that's 1,000 yards. So he only got 121 totes last year. All right, over 5 yards a carry. If that translates or extrapolates to 200 carries, that's 1,000 yards. So yes, it could happen. So let's talk about some of these guys that you may see. Well, you probably will see at least a couple of them in the rotation. I jotted down 3 guys. If you've got some more, let's get those names out there and get our listeners knowing about these guys. The first one I jotted down, of course, Geno Appleberry, the 5'9", 210-pound sophomore. 56 carries, 196 yards last year, 3 touchdowns on the ground, just 3.5 yards per carry, but, it is what it is. Jakari Moses, a name Topper fans should remember, 5'9", 185-pound sophomore, redshirted last year in 2018, dealt with a little bit of an injury. I think maybe it was surgery. I don't know, something he had to recover from. But he was the number 2 rusher in 2017, 67 carries, 268 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Most Topper fans will remember him from his very first carry. Scampered 19 yards for a touchdown against Louisiana Tech. And you're like, hey, who's this young guy finding the end zone first time out of the gate? So, welcome back, Jakari Moses. And then did Gage Walker go from defense to offense? I thought he was in the secondary last year. Was he not in the secondary last year?
I know at one point he was. I'm not sure if it was last year, but yeah, I'm pretty sure at one point he was.
Okay, because Phil still has him listed here in the running back line. So Gage Walker, the 6', 195-pound junior, I could have sworn he was in the secondary, but if he's flipped sides of the ball to the running back position, great. If he can make some plays, I'm sure they're glad to have him. So those are the 3 guys I jotted down coming off the bench for the rotation. Anybody that I missed, you can talk about these guys and anybody else that I might have missed.
Well, you mentioned Jakari Moses. I think he was coming back from an ACL last year. And, they thought he might get healthy by the middle of the year. But I guess they decided to be cautious with him, let him take his red shirt, which I think is great. And now this year, I don't feel like I have to rush him back with having 2 strong guys, plus Geno Appleberry, who has some experience. Of course, we lost DeAndre Furby, 4-year kind of workhorse player for us, even though he had some injury issues for a while. We also lost Marquez Trigg. But we also have Trey Bass coming. He's a fairly local kid from right up the road in Franklin, Kentucky. They're doing the Hilltoppers squad. Had a tremendous junior and senior year in high school. Just a little bit of a smaller kid from a smaller school, but definitely a speedster type back. Could see some special teams time. Could definitely be a return man. Then there's a senior. Is it Keyshawn McClendon I'm thinking of?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I think he might definitely provide some good senior leadership. Of course, Baker's an upperclassman. Hopefully his head's on right. And then with Samuel, coming back, I know he's going to be ready to prove himself and have a good sophomore campaign. And just really, across the board, I'm really excited. This offense plus the athletes and playmakers we have, I think is going to lead to some big success. And I don't think we're going to have to wait a lot of games for a 100-yard rusher under the Helton offense and system.
Yeah, I kind of get that feeling too. And your excitement is, it's worth noting because I think this unit as a whole is in much better shape than it was last year. And that's not necessarily from an athletic standpoint. I think it's from a setup for success standpoint. So, get excited if you're not excited about the running backs because I think you're going to see some exciting plays being made. Now, there is one name that folks are probably like, hey, you guys have forgotten to mention Garland LaFrance. Well, yeah, he played a little bit of running back last year, but apparently he's moved to the wide receiver room this year. So we'll talk about him a little bit next week when we talk about wide receivers and tight ends. So you mentioned DeAndre Furby, in which you answered, I'm sure, my first question to you. Who's the hardest to replace from the unit?
Yeah, anytime you have a 4-year player, someone that's experienced as he was, very vocal, always kind of a step up, take charge. He's very animated, played with a lot of heart, left it all on the field. That's a tough guy to replace. He was a big back. He was a bruiser. Every highlight you remember of him is him running over somebody. He did it from game one to probably his last game. I think his last carry was a touchdown, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so too.
Very fitting. His last carry was a touchdown. So great career. He was a heralded recruit coming out of the Nashville area. Unfortunately, had some injury issues, missed a lot of time. But he battled back, had a pretty good career, and he'll be a tough one to replace for sure.
Yeah. Few memories that come to mind were from DeAndre Furby he may have been his freshman year, and he runs over this run. Not over. He ran basically through someone, and I thought, holy moly, Conference USA is not ready for this guy for the next, 3.5 years. And then the game I was at several years back, I think it was that home opener against Rice, and he may have gotten injured like the first or second carry. Yeah. It was early on in the game, and that basically took him out for most of the season. He was not right for the whole rest of the season, and that was a real bummer because he looked like he was going to, all through spring and summer and everything, it looked like he was going to be a real bright spot in the backfield for the Toppers, and to have the season cut short like that was a real bummer. So, yeah, there's no doubt that he's, not only the only one gone, but even if there were 5 or 6 guys gone from this unit, DeAndre Furby would still probably be the toughest to replace. So, who are you most excited to see in this from this unit in 2019?
Well, it's on again, off again, Mr. Quentin Baker. I think he's going to kind of be a dual threat. He's going to run the ball a lot. I also think he's going to see a lot of balls out of the backfield. Running wheel routes or whatever. I think he's going to catch some balls out of the backfield as well. Very capable, very fast. If he gets the ball in open field, watch out, he's gone. He has some experience in this type of offense. I think that's going to give him a leg up, kind of in this high tempo, get to the line, get the playoff, gain some yards and touchdowns. So I think Quentin is poised to have a good season.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of a threat out of the backfield. Going back to 2017, he did have 9 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown. So, he does have the ability to catch the ball. If that's utilized a little bit more in this Helton offense, then, might be another little added weapon to this Hilltopper offense. Who's the breakout player in 2019, Steve?
Yeah, again, I think, I'd love to say Samuel, but I think it's going to be Quentin. He's kind of a forgotten entity. He wasn't with us last year. The year before, he only played a shortened season when he got hurt against Vanderbilt. Much hyped, much maligned player. And I think he's going to really step up, surprise some people, let us forgive him. Hopefully his actions speak louder than any words. We know he's ready to be back. He wants to be back. Keeps his nose clean. Still grinding and just puts it on the field and has a big season.
I don't want to jump the gun and say that Joshua Samuel is a known entity yet, because you could have that sophomore slump, which happens to so many good backs. But we hope that doesn't happen. So I'm right there with you. I think it's Quentin Baker. I think he's just got a lot to prove. He wants to hush those haters a little bit and show that, hey man, I'm just here to play football. You know what I mean? Let me make plays for you guys. And that's not to knock Joshua Samuel, but I think you kind of know what you have in him. You have a productive back there. He's got nothing to prove. So now if he goes for 1,300 or 1,400 yards, yeah, he's your breakout guy, because, you go from 630-ish to 1,400. Yeah, it's a big breakout. But yeah, I just think you know what you have in him. And I think Quentin is ready, needs to break out a little bit more to prove that, like I said, he's just here to play football, man. I want to show you what I'm all about. So who's the MVP potentially for the RB unit in 2019?
Well, I'm going to hit the trifecta here. I'm coaching him up. I'm talking him up. I think it's going to be Quentin Baker. I think he's going to have a big year. I think he's going to lead that unit and really kind of set the tone and help the development of the guys like, Joshua Samuel that we mentioned, and Jakari Moses that's in the backfield that, in a year or two, they're going to be taking the reins, and he's the kind of the elder statesman in that room, the experienced guy. And I think he's going to be the one leaned on to make the most plays and have the most production. And health willing, I think he's going to deliver.
Well, if you're listening, you got some people pulling for you this year to have a really good season. Steve's got a lot of faith in what you can do. So, well, of course we do too, but, Steve's really pumped up about this and I think he wants to see you put up some numbers, son. So let's see it happen. How about a hot take for this running back unit, or hot takes, whatever you got, 1 or 2 or 10, whatever.
Yeah. I had a little trouble coming up with this one, but I think, looking at that rating, and there's some good, running back units. We talked about one earlier in this show, and UAB has a good running back, and, there's several good running backs in this conference. But I think just total depth and stable-wise, I think that this unit can end up being a top 3 or 4 statistical unit in the conference, not 9 or 10, not lower bottom half. I think they're going to be a top 3 or 4 unit in this league, in Conference USA. So I think, given their preseason prediction, I think that's a pretty good projection and hot take for them.
So you're talking about in overall yardage as a unit, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely fair. I mean, when somebody tells you you're 10th out of 14 and, you come out and bust out top 3, top 4 numbers, I definitely would categorize that as a hot take. I mean, when they're saying you're the lower quarter of the league and you're busting into the top quarter of the league, hey, let's let this offensive line and these backs do the talking. We'll do the running, whatever you want to say. We'll let the numbers, the proof is in the pudding, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty fair, to be honest with you. And I hope that a lot of these teams that the Toppers have to play this year are overlooking this unit, because I think it's going to bite them in the butt. And hopefully before they get a idea that it's bitten them in the butt, it's a little bit too late. And there's either a big lead racked up or too much of the game has gone by. And, I don't think that Hilton plays a ball control type offense, but, I guess good coaches adapt to what they're handed. So, either he's going to be putting up points quickly, or they're going to put up some points and try to control the ball. I don't know. But, hey, I think you'll pleasantly be surprised at season's end with the production that this unit has put up. All right. If you're not, I'm like, every week we're getting closer and closer and closer to football season. And I hope these episodes are getting you more and more excited, because these guys keep bringing the great information. They keep bringing the good insight, the hot takes. And I hope you guys are enjoying it. I think you are, because by the way that, the amount of traffic that our episodes are getting, I think word's getting around that we're putting out some quality stuff, guys. I'm just saying. We appreciate all you guys listening, of course. So we're going to go in and move toward final thoughts this week. Trace, what do you got as we close out the running back breakdown episode of the Moonshine Throwdown podcast?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from a little bit from both teams' perspective, I mean, I feel like the running back units will be strengths of both teams this year. And I feel like both units in the preseason predictions of where they land in the conference according to Phil Steele, I think they're way off. Looking at Marshall a little closer, I mean, 6th is just, that's not – I don't see any fathomable way that they will end up as the quote-unquote 6th best running back unit in the conference. I mean, I just don't see it. And Western Kentucky, I mean, 10th, that's probably way too low. So I feel like that's their at least at worst, they're probably 6th, like at worst. So like, I don't know. I think he kind of missed a boat with that. The guy, Phil Steele, I mean, we read his stuff religiously, basically. It's like the college football preseason Bible, but like, I'm not quite sold on that. But yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I'm so stoked to see what Marshall duo will do, what maybe the other guys will do behind them, if Evans gets a chance or whoever. But I mean, King and Knox are going to be awesome to watch this year. I think it's going to be so much fun. Could be one of the funnest years that Marshall's had in the backfield in a while. maybe since 2014 to keep going back to that magical year. But we always keep talking about it could be one of the best seasons for the running back since then. I think that duo is as good as you'll see in a while for Marshall in years, probably even. So I'm excited. I can't wait to see it. Let's go.
Let's go. Get here already.
Get here.
Weekend of August. Steve, what do you got for us? Final thoughts?
Yeah, like you said earlier, Quentin Baker, if you're listening, time to step up. I want you to have a big year. I believe in you, brother. But no, being real, offensively, I don't think we're going to get worse than we've been in the last couple of years. Then with our offensive line returning in experience and just the jump I expect to see from those guys on top of the play calling and opportunities to make big plays. I mean, I just think this unit and that side of the ball is really just going to have a breakout year. It might not be 14, 15, 16 levels of production, but I think we're going to get the ball rolling in the right direction and put some points on the board and translate that to some W's. And those running backs are going to be a big part of that. So good year, very excited. Barely a month and some change away. So let's go. It's almost time.
Both of you. Let's go. Let's get here. Look, Phil Steele is very informed. He's the best in the business.
Yes.
Bar none, like we all agree, but the man is not perfect. And that's where we come in, sort of, because we pay a little bit closer attention. I'm sure he's paying a lot more attention to the Alabamas and Clemsons of the world than he is of the Marshalls and the Western Kentuckys. Now, that is not to say that he is shortchanging them at all when it comes to this book, because this is comprehensive and it is a wonderful piece of literature, but we pay closer attention to these two teams than he does. So no offense, Phil, we think you're wrong. And we both think that we've got the athletes that can prove you wrong. And we all three think that they will prove you wrong by season's end. But we shall see. So join us next week for the continuation of position group breakdowns here on the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Next week, guys, it's wide receivers and tight ends. This is where the big question marks from the surface come in for the herd, and where the toppers kind of get to sit back and go, yeah, we know what we kind of got here. We're feeling kind of okay with what we got in the house. So find us on Twitter at MoonshineTD. Follow the podcast at MSTD_podcast. And of course, find the show, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Play, whatever. Let's get the heck out of here, guys. We've got a lot of prepping to do for next week. Get at us on Twitter with any comments or questions regarding this episode. We love your interaction. We absolutely appreciate that you download and take the time to listen to our show, because we absolutely love bringing it to you. And I cannot get out of here without extending a personal thank you to Trace and Steven, because it was just the other day, as we record this podcast, that it is the 1 year anniversary of these guys joining the show as co-hosts. And as I tweeted then, maybe it was earlier today, in that year, we have undergone some exponential type growth. And we've rebranded from the Shiner Sit Down to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. And the content that we continue to bring is ever evolving and seems to just get better and better every week. The dynamic that we have as a trio of hosts seems to get better and better every week. So thank you guys for coming aboard and agreeing to do this. And thank you even more for continuing to stay on for a second season, because without you guys, this show, of course, would not be what it is. And along with that, I have to take a second to thank Blair Dimitrolis and Kyle Parks for helping me get to the level that the show was at when Steven and Trace decided that it was good enough of a project to be a part of. So thank you guys for joining the show. I thoroughly appreciate it. I know our listeners thoroughly enjoy it. And happy 1 year anniversary. Here's to an awesome season 4 and season 1 of the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. So I appreciate it, guys. Let's get the heck out of here. Let's get the heck out of here. Steve?
Go Tops.
Trace.
Go Herb.
We're out of here. We'll see you next week talking wide receivers, tight ends. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.